Coming up in Down Under EV Adventures, the long-awaited episode, just why did I buy an EV? Welcome back everyone. This is episode 54 and I've finally got some time to put together an episode of why I bought an EV and also perhaps why my wife also bought one as well. So before we start, let's just give a little bit of a context. So I live in Western Australia, and Western Australia is a massive state. It's bigger than Texas in the US, and it's probably as big as Western Europe. So it's pretty big, and it's got long distances between cities. And I'm inland, and Perth is on the coast. That's the largest city in Western Australia and the capital, and it's about a 6.5-hour drive in an ICE vehicle. So you're talking around about a 600 kilometer trip, which is quite a long way. Although I would seldom do that these days. We would seldom drive to Perth in one day. So I found as we got a little bit older, we prefer to just stay overnight. So we usually stay about halfway. Sometimes, for example, we would stay in Merredin, which you can see on the map here, roughly where that is. And if you'll know from my other channel, Finding G-Spots, you'll know that my wife and I, we love to travel and we like to explore the region. So we often do a lot of side trips anyway. So we're lucky enough to have seen a lot of Western Australia driving around in our various cars. Now, before this, I did own a Mitsubishi plug-in hybrid, which I did absolutely love the car. It was very roomy and comfortable. And you can go back and have a look at some episodes about that if you like. But anyway, previous to that, we did own a few Mitsubishis and Subarus. They were mainly the sort of cars we owned, so sort of reliable cars. Now, we've had solar power for several years now. And, because of that, it's been really good. We don't have to pay as much for our power, of course, because we get a lot of sunshine where we live in the goldfields. And we always were going to go to an EV one day simply because we could charge the car pretty much for free. Now, I won't go too much into our solar system today because that's not what the episode is about. But anyway, so last year my wife was looking to upgrade her car. And because my wife doesn't really travel long distances in her car, she just was going to use it mainly around town, we thought it might be a good idea to jump in and get an EV. There's my wife there with her new car. She was very happy with it. Now, I was tasked with the job of driving it back from Perth here to Kalgoorlie in the goldfields. And that's pretty much where the story begins. So we flew to Perth to pick up the Atto 3 around about September last year, and my wife had to go back to work, so she flew back to Kalgoorlie, and it was my job to drive the car back to Kalgoorlie. Now, there wasn't really a WA EV charging network to speak of back then, at least certainly not in the goldfields and where we lived. And I did have the PlugShare app because, obviously I had the plug-in hybrid and occasionally I would charge in Perth. But you got to remember, the Mitsubishi is a CHAdeMO plug. So I wasn't really familiar with the Type 2, and, there was really no fast chargers outside of the capital city anyway. But anyway, I managed to plan the trip okay, and if you go over to my other channel, you can actually see that whole trip in its entirety. So I will put a link in the description, and if you're interested, you can go back and have a look at that. But anyway, I got to Merredin, to the accommodation where I normally stay at, and the guy there actually owns an EV, and he did have a wall charger there, and I was expecting to be able to use it. He said I was able to use it, but then he told me as I rocked up, "I'm sorry, but I'm having some issues with my charger." But then, before I could get too disappointed, he said, "No worries, the Merredin fast chargers have just opened 2 or 3 days ago. You can go and use them." So here's a quick look at the Merredin fast chargers then. So it was pretty much at that point that I realized, well, hey, it's going to be a lot easier now if you want to drive between Kalgoorlie and Perth, because roughly halfway you've got these great fast chargers, part of the WA EV network. Now, since I filmed that trip, which I did in my wife's car, we've not only had these ones open in Merredin, but a couple of 100 k's further along in Southern Cross, they opened up. About a few weeks later, the ones in Coolgardie opened up, but they're only about 30 kilometres from my hometown. Then we had some open in Norseman, which is a couple of hundred k's south of Kalgoorlie. And then finally, Kalgoorlie itself got some fast chargers too a few weeks ago. So basically a whole bunch of chargers opened up. So in the last 6 months, the WA EV network has just gone ballistic in Western Australia. Now this is an old map I'm showing you here of part of the WA EV network, and most of those green stations on the map are now open. So a couple of the yellow ones still aren't open, particularly the ones across the Nullarbor there. But it's just been amazing how quickly it's taken off, and there's more to come. There's more that's going to be open, particularly in the north of the state. So that was the first reason that got me thinking that, I do longer trips, so maybe I can actually own an EV and be able to do the longer trips and not rely on the petrol like I was with my plug-in hybrid. Now the second reason is the technology. The technology is just so far superior to what's in most ICE cars, unless you spend a lot of money, of course. Particularly when I compared it to my Mitsubishi plug-in hybrid, which I'll show you some footage of here. And it's a real shame. I think probably 10-12 years ago, Mitsubishi were actually leading with their EV technology in many respects, certainly outside of China anyway. And they even had the little tiny electric car. So that was called the i-MiEV. It wasn't a very good car, but hey, it was going back quite a few years, I think even before Tesla. And then of course, beginning in 2014, they started doing the plug-in hybrid, and I thought, yay, Mitsubishi are on the ball here. But then they just virtually did nothing for the next several years, and pretty much their cars became outdated. Which brings me to my third reason: battery degradation of the Mitsubishi Outlander. Now I used an app called the Fev Watchdog app, which you can use if you own a plug-in hybrid, and you can keep track of a lot of information about the car. I mainly used to keep track of what percentage I would use using just the electric motor. So it was quite handy. And look, having said all that about the technology being updated, I did enjoy just driving it in electric mode around town, and I was using it pretty much just in electric mode all the time, except for when I did a long trip. Unfortunately, the problem was, even though the car was only a couple of years old, I noticed the battery had degraded down to about 81% of its original state of charge, and that was just in a couple of years. So yeah, not very good in terms of the battery technology. Which brings me to my final reason, and that is a good offer. Now in Australia, there's a car sales site I should say, which is called carsales.com and .com.au, being Australia. And yeah, it's a pretty good site. You can look for cars and get prices and so on. Anyway, they've got this feature on there called Instant Offer, and what you can do is you can put all your car details in there in the major cities, and you'll get offers back from mainly warehouses who purchase cars, and then they sometimes on-sell them to dealers, or they sell them direct themselves. And anyway, I inputted all my details in for my Mitsubishi plug-in hybrid and was rather shocked to receive a fantastic offer back. And just out of interest, I also contacted Tesla saying I was interested in a Model Y, and they actually came back to with a very similar offer. So basically I got offered close to $42,000 for my car, and that was from both Tesla and a warehouse. And at the same time, I happened to notice that there was also second-hand BYD's Attos starting to be sold in Western Australia. And not only that, ex-demo vehicles were being sold from the BYD dealers themselves. So that's where it all came together. I managed to get an ex-demo model. If you go back and have a look, you can see I talk a little bit more about that in the earlier episodes. And it was sold to me by the actual guy who used it. So his name was Matthew, and he works at BYD in Osborne Park, I think it is. And basically I got into that Atto for less than $50,000. So the changeover price was less than $10,000 basically. So I mean, it was pretty much a brand new car. It was about 6 to 9 months old. And I thought, well, geez, I'd be stupid not to do this, really. I own my Mitsubishi outright, and I just paid cash for the difference. Now, this all went down about 6 months ago, so we're talking around November last year, and I knew that the new year was approaching, and I knew once it ticked over to 2024, my car would be technically a year older in the eyes of car dealers, I should say, and then that the price would fall dramatically. So, I thought I had a few weeks to decide, and I thought, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So yeah, that's basically how I got into an EV and my reasons behind it. And of course, we already had a wall charger. We've had that since 2022 when we first bought the plug-in hybrid. So, we were all set in a perfect position to be able to charge the EV at home as well. And, like I mentioned before, we've got the solar power. So those are the reasons why I chose an EV. If you've got one, tell me what was the reasons why you chose it. I believe that there's a tipping point, and if you reach the tipping point and everything works out in your favor, then you're more likely to go ahead and choose an EV. For some people it might be the price, other people it might be the charging network. So whatever the reasons, I think everybody's got that little tipping point, and once you reach it, well, it just becomes an overwhelming decision that's easy to do. And that's basically what happened to me. Okay, so there you have it. Why I decided to buy an EV. And I can tell you, I'm never going back to a petrol car or even a plug-in hybrid. It's just so much easier with an EV. I've got my own little petrol station, if you like, in my garage. It's mostly free to charge, and I only use the fast chargers on a long trip. Okay, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you got some useful information. There is so much misinformation and bullshit out there regarding EVs, and I hope that I've managed to give you some of the facts, because I own one and I've been through the process, so I know what I'm talking about, and you can clearly see that in my videos. There's no bullshit from me. Okay, take care out there on the roads. I really appreciate you sticking around for this episode, and I hope to see you very soon with more great stuff on Down Under EV Adventures. Okay, bye for now.